Everybody, it's Emil. It's Emil Guillermo. Emil Amok to you. How are you? This is Emil Amok's Takeout for a Thursday. This is show number 143. We've done 143 of these. God, we're still doing. They're not stopping us. We're going to keep doing them. This is better than doing an open mic somewhere. It's better than, well, it's just my mic. It's better than doing a fringe festival in Elgin, Illinois. That wouldn't be so bad. I got friends in Elgin. But here I am in the central part of California, the best state for COVID. It looks like the best state for COVID. One of the states the only state that survived the red in one of the latest maps put out by the CDC. And we do this show Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, live. And so if you know, hey, Emil, did you check your sundial? You're about 3 minutes early. Yeah. It's because this is the lagniappe, right? This is the little something extra. So look, we're going to talk about all these things, on the WDAAAT, which is what does, let's make it singular. What does an Asian American think? Because I'm a singular Asian American. What does an Asian American think? So we're going to talk about the missing women issue, right? The missing white woman syndrome that was first coined by Gwen Ifill, the black news woman of consequence. I mean, she was really for African Americans, she was an example of she was New York Times and she was on the NewsHour. I talked to her briefly once. She was tough. Yeah, and no one, when people said, look, it was Gwen Ifill who said, I talked about the white missing women syndrome. She coined it. And suddenly the light bulb went off. They said, oh yeah, this is the Gabby Petito story. What the heck's going on? And now the New York Times done something. We'll talk about that a little bit. I'm going to talk about Harvard Unity. There's this idea that if you get all of the alumni of color who went to a school like Harvard together, maybe you get something that approximates unity. Maybe. I'm going to tell a story at that event. It's online tomorrow, but I just had some thoughts about it because I know that a lot of people, especially Asian Americans, love this idea of Harvard. In fact, they love the idea of Harvard so much they're suing Harvard because they say that Harvard's admissions is unfair. Asian Americans are leading that charge. It's an anti-affirmative action suit. And Asian Americans are leading that charge, and it has become kind of like a dividing line in our community. So I'll talk a little about that. I'll talk about the COVID. I love to talk about COVID. And in the remaining minutes of our lagniappe here, I mean, we go for about 30 minutes or so on the show, but for the remaining minutes of the lagniappe, I just want to do a little news scan because you got to be mindful on the news. Checking the New York Times. New York passes sweeping bills to improve conditions for delivery workers. And I only mention this because, we are in this digital revolution. You say, oh, food delivery. What does that have to do with technology? Well, it's the app, just like taxis. What does that have to do with technology? Well, it's the app Uber, for food delivery. You got DoorDash, you got all the other Uber Dash or whatever they call it. I don't do those apps, but there are all these delivery workers now who drivers and all these people who are brought into the digital revolution. And they're not the ones who get the lavish stock options and are making millions of dollars once they go public. DoorDash is worth billions now. I mean, I don't know exactly what it's worth, but the last time I checked, when they were about to IPO or, when they were in the financial news a couple months ago, I was just astonished how much people have valued an app like DoorDash. So this is the digital revolution. It's been going on since the 2000s, early 2000, right? You have the first wave and the second wave, and at every stage, right? They have changed our lives, changed everything we do for the matter of this technological convenience, which is good, right? Good on the one hand, but it seems that we forget all the stuff that we fought for the last 100 years in America, for labor, for the worker, for the consumer. And so we need the digital revolution to protect them, because right now the digital revolution benefits the people with money, benefits the people who are the venture capitalists, benefits, to a degree the consumers. But look at the exploited workers. The consumers, if they get extra costs passed on to them. Consumer rights, try to call up an app company if you have a beef. There's no, there's no connection between service and, really providing service to consumers. In fact, they just assume you're just a digit. You don't exist to a upstart tech company who's looking to IPO. So thank goodness we're getting something like these laws to improve conditions for delivery workers in New York, because that's the other part of the digital revolution that really hasn't taken place. We've seen the upheaval in all these other aspects of society and life. And in doing so, they've thrown away all the good that's happened to labor, all the good that's happened to consumer rights, because the VCs and the venture capitalists and the technologists who are putting forth all these different innovations, they need to get their IPO. They need to make their millions off the back of somebody. So thank goodness, at least this should be an awakening that you got to do something for the workers. You got to do something for the consumer. You can't just plow over the entire thing we built over 100 years and say, hey, digital revolution, it's great. Anyway, I just had to get that off my chest. But that happens to be the front page of the New York Times in the digital version. Let's see. There's a senior U.S. diplomat to Haiti resigned, citing inhumane deportations. Look, this is one of the first stories you see, because you can't help but notice those people living under a bridge. You can't help but notice those people in Del Rio, Texas. And now you have this weird, two-pronged system where some people are allowed to go into America. Some people are allowed to be processed and stay in the U.S. And the vast number are being deported. And there are planes already going back to Haiti, which is crazy, because a lot of these people from Haiti, by way of Latin America, who find themselves in the Mexican border in Del Rio, Texas, they haven't been back to Haiti in years. It's like sending back a dreamer. You don't do it. So you got the special envoy who's quit. Diplomat excoriated the decision to send migrants back to a country reeling from natural disasters and political crises. I mean, that's sort of the big picture. But the fact is, you're sending them back there and you're saying, look, this is the U.S.'s policy. Let us save you from the toilet of Del Rio, Texas, and send you to another toilet in Haiti. You don't get to come into America. That's a crisis. I don't know how the Biden administration solves it, because one of the vocal people against what the Biden administration is doing is Vice President Kamala Harris. Certainly, the Black Caucus, she met with the Black Caucus, and the Black Caucus in the House, they're upset about what's happening. And it's just, here's the thing that should concern Asian Americans in terms of what does an Asian American think. We need comprehensive immigration reform. And one by one, every single little thread that we had hopes for, that might mean something different in a new Democratic administration, not a Trump administration, but a Biden administration. Now, suddenly, Oh my God. It's the hopes for immigration reform with this on top of what already was existing with the southern border and people coming up from Mexico and Latin America and Central America to get people united on immigration reform. I don't think it's going to happen. And then you have that alongside this whole financial system issue, debt ceiling limits, and are we going to run out of money? Which I don't want to talk about today, but that's one of the issues, and whether or not they're going to pass at the budget. Getting the Democrats, the left, the far left, the middle, and I guess the middle, the far left and the moderates together. Uh, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But I know immigration isn't going to happen. Immigration is not going to happen. So that's a New York Times. The Washington Post news scan for the top of the hour. White House to tell agencies to prepare for possible shutdown. They've got to do that. They just have to do that because they don't know what's going to happen. And you need something like you need two defections amongst the Democrats, right? And you need one vote in the Senate. I mean, those are the margins. And you got the people the moderates who are like saying, "Hey, I don't know if I can go along with the kind of package you want to go for." So yeah, the Washington Post talks about debt ceilings and all that. They've got to, but I don't know. Let's just hope that cooler heads prevail, because one thing that we'd like to distinguish between the Biden administration and the Trump administration is that, hey, the Biden administration can get things done, even with their slim majority. They can get things done with Nancy Pelosi, Biden working together with the moderates and the progressives. Although, I don't know, we're coming down to crunch time. It's getting close. And so when I see the headline in the Washington Post, White House to tell agencies to prepare for possible shutdown, not great. Also worth noting on the Post, they've got this map. Newspapers. I love newspapers. I usually read them physically. I get my document camera on, and let's see, my newspaper is too far to reach right now. But the one good thing about web based, or the graphical interface available on your phone or online, is that they could do these digital things, right? They could show these maps, and the map showing the high vaccination, low hospitalization places in America. And it's in the let's see if I can share this on my that's not it. I punched up the wrong one. Let's see if I can share this. I don't ordinarily do this because it's tough to see. I'm going to have to rehearse this. It doesn't quite work that way. Anyway, look, they've got this map in the Washington Post, their website, and they show the purple states. The purple states are low vaccination, high hospitalizations, which is probably the worst thing that you can have, that you could be in America. Where are those places? Can you guess? Texas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana. Yeah. Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia. I mean, it's just terrible. Idaho. Actually, Nevada is pretty bad. What are the good states? New Mexico looks surprisingly good. New Mexico. California is surprisingly good on the coast, but when you talk inland, it looks just as purple as almost Texas and Florida. In fact, the Sacramento, Stockton, the positivity rates are like double what it is through the state. So where I am now is probably the worst in California, but it's equal to the worst in Texas, the worst in Florida, the worst in all those states that were purpley. But that's the purple states are low vaccination, high hospitalization. The green states, California is not the greenest. Only on the coast, like San Francisco, Santa Barbara, LA. The greener states are places like New Mexico looks pretty green on this map. And so does the Dakotas. So does lots of New England looks pretty green on this state, on this page. Alaska, purple. Hawaii looks dark, does not look good. So the headline, Mapping America's Hospitalization and Vaccination Divide, serious thing. And, you know, one of the things that I like to do on this show is I like to say, hey, look, let all the other shows out there put out misinformation about the vaccine, put out misinformation about, you know, the virus. I'm just going to tell you outright, get vaccinated. Get vaccinated. You're not going to die. It's going to keep you from dying. You may still get sick, but if you get vaccinated, the chances are you will not suffer the worst fate. And that's about as good as it gets at this point until more data comes in. And then, what do you know? More data, we can assess it. Hey, it's even better than we thought. But you got to get in the pool. Everyone in the pool. Anyway, that's the Washington Post contribution here. They also have a story about how U.S. Special Envoy to Haiti resigns over inhumane deportations. I mean, why? Well, you know, why are we deporting? It really is ridiculous when you take people from, like I said, one toilet and say, here's a better toilet, but not in America. We'll put you in a toilet in Haiti. And you know what they're going through because of the weather and earthquakes and whatnot. They're still recovering. One thing in all the stories that I haven't seen, at least on television, they never mentioned the special envoy. It's Special Envoy Daniel Foote. That's his name. I know why they want to make him anonymous, but give him credit for speaking out. He says, our policy approach to Haiti remains deeply flawed and my recommendations have been ignored and dismissed. I will not be associated with the United States' inhumane, counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees and illegal immigrants to Haiti, a country where American officials are confined to secure compounds because of the dangers posed by armed gangs in control of daily life. He was named Special Envoy in July, just weeks after the assassination of Haiti's president, and then plunged the country into turmoil. And wouldn't you know, he's a short timer, but he was quick to make the assessment. This is not where I want to hang my diplomatic hat. So he's making some noise, Daniel Foote, and it's good. But it's causing some problems for the Biden administration because what are they going to do? I don't know what they're going to do with Haiti, but they're not going to solve anything anytime soon. Not when they have a system right now that apparently is kind of two-faced, where some people get in and some people don't. Hey, it sounds like Facebook almost, like that whitelisting thing. Okay, so that's the news scan. This is the Emil Amok's Takeout. Like I said, we've done 143 of these things. 143. And it's premised on this idea that, hey, what does an Asian American think? What does an Asian American think? I'll tell you what, when I see something in my email that talks about, see that thing in the back there? If you're watching live on YouTube, go to my YouTube channel, Emil Amok, 2 words. You're on the right channel if you see the bulldog with the pink sweater. No, if you're watching me on Facebook, I'm not the bulldog with the pink sweater. That's only on my YouTube channel. But anyway, I have this gong, and the gong is a Kulintang gong. And I got an email today about a new album, a double album produced by the Smithsonian Folkways Records, Kulintang Kultura, a new double album of traditional contemporary music. And it's coming out October 1st. You can go online on YouTube and get little snippets of it. You can pre-order if you want, if you go to that YouTube channel. But Danny Kalanduyan is, he's the late great master. I had the privilege of talking to him a couple of times. Had the privilege of talking to his Kulintang partner, Ty Buchholz. And when I got this email from Theo Gonsalves, who is at the Smithsonian and co-produced this, I said, are you in on this? And she said, yeah. And she's going to come on the show next Thursday. I mean, this is, what does an Asian American think? You got to think, hey, this is our music. This is our legacy, our musical legacy. I put mine on the wall so I don't play it because I'm not a great Kulintang gong. Well, the gong, the agong, which I have there, is just a timekeeper. So, like, if you could tap your foot, you should be able to play the agong. It's the tambourine of Kulintang instruments. But I'm not like Danny Kalanduyan. No way. Anyway, that show's next Thursday. So, what does an Asian American think? That's a good question. If you look at polls, they always leave us out. There is never enough Asian Americans in the sampling to say, oh, Asian Americans think this about Haiti. They think this about immigration. They think this about X and X and X. We're not included in general. They miss us generally. And the Filipinos with a name like Guillermo, they'll think, oh, well, count him as an Hispanic. I have to say, no, I'm not an Hispanic. I'm an Asian American. Oh, then you don't count. So what does an Asian American think is a totally relevant question. It's a totally relevant and important question. That's why I ask. But now, the other day, I think yesterday, someone put in, what does an Asian American think? Well, it really depends, doesn't it, Emil? Whether you're born here or whether or not you immigrated. And when you immigrated, oh my God, she was so detailed. Of course, there is nuance. And I don't mean to make fun of her, but because she asks really important questions. What does an Asian American think? We're a broad, diverse group. She just mentioned a couple of things. Where'd you immigrate from? When'd you come? Were you born here? Like me? I answered a polling thing or a questionnaire. They said, were you born here? They asked, did you come here? When did you arrive? Because even when you arrived here, it's a big deal. Oh, did you arrive here in 2020? Recently? Did you arrive here 2015? Did you arrive here 2010? Did you arrive here in 2000? 1980? Oh, yeah, because the immigration laws changed in 65, and you had to wait like 15 years in line if you're Filipino, to get a visa to come into America. I mean, there are all sorts of stories and circumstances in our immigration history. And remember, 1965 was the big doorbuster. It was like Black Friday immigration-wise. They had door kickers or doorbusters. You came in through because 65, that's when they made the law. They said, come on in, Asian Americans or Asians. They weren't Asian Americans yet, but they were looking for them after years of being shut out with unfair discriminatory quotas, the 1965 Immigration Act. Let everyone in. And that's how we got our really the first real wave. The people came before, like the Filipinos who came in like my father's year, the 20s. But the people came during World War II. Still, little drips. Not, and they weren't drips, but the flow was just a little bit. The big flow, 1965, then the 80s, then the 2000s. So what does an Asian American think? Depends. It depends. But in lieu of being invisible, people can tune in here and they can say, "Oh, this is why. This is what an Asian American thinks." One Asian American. And this is how we should consider how other Asian Americans think. It depends on, when they came here. I mean, for example, I think it's assumed that most Asian Americans are Democrats. It would be a safe assumption. But it's actually more like 60, 70%. So 60, 40, 70, 30. It depends. But there's more and more moving over from Democrat to independent or moving over to Republican. Certainly, if you look at the Vietnamese community, you look at the Filipino community, a lot more conservatives out there. So it's a complex community, and they don't care. The mainstream doesn't care. The mainstream doesn't pay attention to us. They don't care. So I talk about us because I care. I care about who we are and what we are. What does an Asian American think? I think we think something similar to me. I was born here, but even the Asian American immigrants, I think, who are the wokest? The dreamers, the people who come here in the last 10, 15 years. Although, as I say that, there are people who came with jobs, came with capital. They came in a little different situation than a lot of immigrants who came in 65. Complex community, and we're just beginning to scratch it on a mainstream level. We talk about it here because, we know the community, we've been in the community, but there's a whole young side of the community that I'm not as privy to, just because of generation and age. But fascinating, the Asian Americans, and I can't wait to see more interpretation of the new census numbers so we can get a handle on what the Asian Americans think. Here's one thing. I was talking to, or listening to a woman who represents the Pacific Islander community. And she said, we ought to be coalitional. Now, here's a woman who's already talking about how to get stuff done, being practical. He said, look, I'm proud, essentially, to be Asian American, Pacific Islander, but we're a small group. If we're going to get things done, we're going to have to work with Hispanics. We're going to have to work with African Americans. She got it. I hope there are more Asian American Pacific Islanders like her out there thinking, yeah, we have to work in coalition, which is why, when this missing women story came out, Gabby Petito, they found her remains. They're still looking for her fiance who's in the swamp. But look, if you are a true crime fiend, there's a lot of true crime fiends or fans. It's a big thing now, but a lot of people are saying, oh, the family's probably helping him out by saying, oh, he went off into the swamp in Florida when chances are he took his backpack and headed north to Canada. Because you'd have to think at some point he's going to have to want food, he's going to want out, or maybe he went to the swamp to kill himself and not have his body be found. Who knows? Or he was thinking about what happened and he said, look, I'm going to throw them off my trail, send them to Florida, and I'm heading off to Montana or someplace. Fascinating case. It's not just because Gabby Petito is a white woman. However, that's kind of the clickbait, right? People in social media. And there are other white women like Gabby Petito who say, look, op-ed in the Washington Post, we're doing this for us. We're doing this not just because she's a white woman, she could be us. But people of color see this story and they say, hey, here's a headline, Reuters, as Petito case captivates U.S., missing Native women ignored. This is one group that Asian Americans need to embrace and say, yeah, we know what it's like. Certainly Filipinos know what it's like to be colonized. We weren't put on a reservation like the Native Americans, but the Philippines was colonized. There was a war. The U.S. waged a war, killed 1 million people, or 1 million people died. A lot of civilians died. The Philippine-American War. But we need to embrace the Native American groups. They're the loudest on this Petito case, though the blacks are too, because it was Gwen Ifill, a prominent black journalist, New York Times, PBS NewsHour. She said she's the late Gwen Ifill. She used the term, hey, missing white woman syndrome. So here's the thing about Gabby Petito. Her body found over the weekend in Wyoming. And of course, where is the area where there are the most Native American women who are missing? But that Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah area, all around there. Here's a quote from Jolene Holgate, who's a director for the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. He said, there's a rate of violence against Native women that's happening and it doesn't seem to be highlighted. My heart goes out to the family of Gabby Petito. I know they're probably looking for closure. That's very important. The national attention and resources that were put toward that case when there's such a high number of missing and murdered Indigenous women cases in Wyoming and even the neighboring state of Montana, it did not feel good. I think there's this practice of discounting Indigenous bodies when it comes to folks who go missing or murdered. And this is the thing, in Wyoming, the state where Petito's body was found, only 18% of Indigenous female homicide victims get newspaper coverage, compared with 51% for white female and male victims, according to a state report. That's pathetic, right? Between 2011 and September 2020, more than 400 Indigenous women and girls were reported missing in Wyoming, according to that report. And homicide is the third leading cause of death among Native women who are murdered at rates more than 10 times the national average. So this is the thing. I wasn't jumping all over the Petito story when it first broke. I was just looking at it as a news consumer. Oh, they're talking about this case. Actually, I was more fascinated by the case because Gabby Petito was a vagabonder. She lived in a Ford Transit with her fiance. She was living the world. It was Nomadland, right? Fascinated by that movie. Even though my wife knows that you would not be happy in a little van like that, she says. Where are you going to put your newspapers? Well, she's got a point. I'm going to have a trailer. But there was a kind of that kind of spirit, right, that attracted me. It wasn't the fact that she was blonde or young, but it's that youthful spirit of the open road. I'm out seeing America. And like I said, Nomadland was a Oscar winner, one of my favorite movies. I thought, she's living the dream. except when I started hearing the stories about domestic violence. Not real. I mean, it's not a dream, but it's the reality. And now they found her body. So I don't know what's going to happen in terms of, well, suddenly all the papers in Wyoming, there are not many newspapers in Wyoming, but at least now the light is being, shined on this disparity, which is shameful. It's shameful because what's it say? It doesn't say that indigenous women's lives matter. Not at all. And this is where Asian Americans, AAPI, as members of the BIPOC, do you call it BIPOC or do you call it Black Indigenous People? BIPOC or BIPOC, someone said. I guess until some enterprising neologist comes up with a better term, we have BIPOC. But I think this is where the BIPOC say, hey, look, let's pay attention to this problem of the missing Native American indigenous women. All right, other things in the news. I wanted to talk about this one issue, just one last issue. Tomorrow, I'm going to be part of this thing called the Harvard Unity Weekend. I went to school there in the 70s, and unity is a big phrase. It's an alumni association thing. They do have a Harvard Alumni Association, and the Harvard Alumni Association is the president's an Asian American woman, a youngish woman. I mean, she's like class of 90 or something, and venture. I mean, she's successful, right? But my point about the alumni, so most of the Harvard alums are white. It's the white experience. It's the white alumni experience. It's a different experience if you were a person of color. And once again, we got to go back to the history timeline based on when you got there. Totally different experience, right? I mean, there were African Americans at Harvard in 1924. Not many, but in 1924 there was also a Ku Klux Klan group that took its picture next to John Harvard's statue in Harvard Yard. 1924, when there was a number. I mean, that was the year of some of the most xenophobic immigration laws enacted in America. So that was 1924. 1955, 30 years later, there was a cross burning at Harvard Yard. So these are things that, that are coming out. People like to shove them off in the corner and say, oh, yeah, we're perfect and liberal. Yeah. No, it's not. And even to this day, there are things that people are discovering about different things, paintings or artifacts in museums that show, that are artifacts of slavery or of a time that the university, not just Harvard, but others, Yale, Princeton, all should be ashamed of. So this weekend, there's this Harvard Unity. It's an online reunion because they're cognizant of the virus, and they're not going to do it on campus. But they're getting together, and I'm going to be part of a story slam and telling my story. Because my experience was totally different. I mean, I don't talk about Harvard because I want to brag about it. I talk about it because it's a way of exposing it, a way of saying, it wasn't that great. And they weren't really aware of how to treat people of color back then. So you really had to make do. It's a story that the one I tell at the slam, and once I get the tape, I'll show it and share it with all you folks here in this online community. But it's a story that says, hey, all these processes of bringing more people into a thing to integrate it, to make it reflect society. There was a lot of evolution. It's not like when you were coming in the 70s, a short, less than 10 years after the Civil Rights Act. It's not like Harvard really knew how to roll out the welcome mat for you. It was not easy. It was alienating. It was tough. And I thought I was just going there to get a degree. I didn't know I was leaving with Harvard wounds, and that I would not just have my Harvard diploma, but I would need a Harvard 12-step program, essentially, to make me feel whole again after that experience. Look, I don't mean to devalue the Vietnam War and what people who have PTSD from the war feel, but there was a lot of trauma being a kid from the mission going from the West Coast to the East Coast to a place where the only Filipinos and most of the Asian Americans tended to be well-to-do Asians from the ancestral home, from the actual foreign countries. It was strange. And, I think we just, stiff upper lip. We tried to endure. We tried to just do it. But the story I tell really talks about how it was more difficult than I thought. And that I had to overcome a lot more than I have cared to admit over time. I mean, I used to joke about it a lot. I did a show all pucked up about my experience at Harvard and at NPR, mostly for jokes, mostly to tell jokes about it. And then I was working with a director the other day, and she said, "Wow, you're funny," which must mean there was a lot of pain. And she said, "You should cut out a few jokes and reveal more of the pain." And that's something that I intend to do in future work. But this is one of the issues about telling stories. It's not necessarily therapeutic. It's just an exposure of what that situation was. And it's so ironic now that, all these Harvard kids or all these students, high school, want to get to Harvard. I mean, Harvard is 25% Asian American. That's the crazy thing. And of the kids who are filing this lawsuit against Harvard, saying that Harvard discriminates against Asian Americans, which is really ridiculous. I mean, it's 25% Asian American. How can it discriminate against Asian Americans? But Asian Americans want that Harvard degree. They say, I've got perfect scores. I got high SATs. I got perfect grades. I'm a perfect candidate to be a Harvard person. They're suing. And the case could go up to the Supreme Court. I mean, it's at the Supreme Court that we should have a decision at some point. I don't know when, but it's at that stage where we're waiting to see, well, where are we on this? It's been about at least, 4 years now. So my story kind of puts all that into context about how Harvard deals with the people that they have. Right now, Asian Americans who are at Harvard are, I would say, they're doing okay. There's a sense when you're 25% of a student body, there's a natural assimilative sort of thing that goes on. When you're just one of, I know, less than 5%, you can't help but at the least at the most minimal slight or the most minimal transgression, you can't help but wonder if you really belong, if you really, you know, if you fit in. Of course, I'm talking now as a older fellow who has been mindful about this and is thinking about this. Look, I'm not wallowing in self-pity. I'm wallowing in self-discovery. But when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, stiff upper lip, you know why you're here. Get the degree, get a job, go out and become the American success story. At least, that's the hope. I don't know. Put your head down, you grind. I wish I was as mindful then as I am now about Harvard. Anyway, that story I'm telling tomorrow night online, and once I think it's sold out, but once they give me a link, I'll share it with the audience and we'll talk more. Anyway, that's it for our program today. Hey, look, I covered everything. I covered news scan. We did COVID, a little COVID talk. We talked about Harvard Unity. Now, that's the thing. Here's what I hope. As we share stories about our experience there at Harvard, you realize, hey, I'm not alone. Hey, this happened not just in 2021 or 2010 or 2005 or 1995 or 1980. It happened back in the 70s. Wow. Harvard hasn't learned very much. I think that's sort of the upshot. But I think they're better now. They have to be better now. You've got people of color in administrative posts. You have people who are sensitive. You have people trying to make sure that Harvard starts to look like America, and it does. 25% Asian American, it does. Of course, it's going to upset the portion of Asian America that has sued Harvard because they feel that Harvard discriminates against them. But this is what makes Asian Americans such a complex and interesting and nuanced group. All right. Time to start saying goodbye. Hey, you can Twitter me at Emil Amok, Emil Amok. See the replays on amok.com, amok.com. Every day, 2 p.m. Pacific, live, Monday through Friday. We're here. Email. Do you email? You can email. Emil, Emil at amok.com. This is the Micro Talk Show of the AAPI and the AAXs. And you get to this point of the show. And this is the point of the show where just for making it this far, you deserve my group hug, my group, my thanks. And I'm thanking you. I'm thanking you for listening, for being here, for listening to what I have to say. It's important. And I know that toward the end, I know what's helped me is the little METTA meditation, the loving kindness meditations. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. In the pandemic, may you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Walk through that wall of shame. You're worth it. Give yourself a hug. Thank you for being here. Emil Guillermo. Mahal